His reviews will get you further than the film will ever go. If you give him just a moment of your time, he'll let you know which movies rock, which movies stink, which movies shouldn't have been released. Say hello to Confused Matthew.
This is the Don Bluth film that I've seen the most, and it was absolutely outstanding. The Secret of NIMH is a children's film in the classic sense that I use that term. It's for children, but that child could be 90 years old. Don Bluth has a reputation for making films for kids that contain very adult elements, such as abandonment, deaths in the family, longing for home and having to find what home is for you. All these things that Disney would not do at the time, but eventually themes such as this would become standard in almost every animated film to come. Don Bluth was very ahead of his time and innovative, and I don't think he's ever been given enough credit for that. This was the first film he did after leaving Disney, and he would later go on to do some really good films like An American Tail and The Land Before Time, and he would also go on to do some very bad films such as Rock-a-Doodle and Titan A.E. I still haven't decided if All Dogs Go to Heaven was good or not. I don't think it was. But in my opinion, this was his best. Not only is the story and the characters excellent, but in my opinion, this was the most intellectually interesting of all of his films. Most of Don Bluth's films, hell, most animated films actually, are about a young character who has to find themselves and overcome some personal struggle. This film isn't like that at all. This is about a middle-aged mother trying to protect her ailing child. Mrs. Brisby is the wife of Jonathan Brisby, whose name is famous in these parts, but she doesn't yet know why. At the moment, she needs to find a way to protect her son from the coming plow. She can't move him because he's really, really sick, but if he stays where he is, he'll be crushed. Not only does this give us a conflict usually unseen in films like this, but it opens the movie with a contrast from what's to come. We see these animals living like real animals. They're subject to the whims of human schedules and human creations. It never even occurs to them to try and do something about the plow until they actually have to. They all just have to adapt to what's going on. The character Brisby herself is all about bravery, but it's a kind of bravery we don't often see in films like this. She's forced to stop the plow from destroying her house, and she is told to visit the Great Owl, who could potentially kill her outright. Mrs. Brisby is terrified of everything that happens to her in this film, and when a big scary event is over, she can usually be found curled up in a ball somewhere, having been traumatized by this event. The absence of fear is not what makes this woman brave. The absence of fear is actually not what makes anyone brave. Her bravery lies in the fact that she is afraid, but she acts in spite of that fear in order to save her son. She's told by the Great Owl to go see the Rats of NIMH, and this is where the movie just blows my mind. The Rats of NIMH were actually lab rats that were experimented on, and through those experiments were given an intellect. Jonathan Brisby was almost single-handedly responsible for their escape, which is why he is renowned. As soon as they escaped, they created this place in the Rosebush complete with electricity and governmental debates. This is absolutely one of the most ingenious and fascinating stories I have ever seen. The Rats of NIMH were given the ability to think like a human being, and what did they do? They made a society. They innovated technologies and created traditions. They were morally conflicted about things like stealing and helping creatures less than them. From a very young age, this piqued my intellectual fascination. NIMH gave them all intellects, and they didn't know what to do with it. Some of them wanted to stay and continue to live off the farmer's power. Some of them wanted to leave and make a more secluded and honest life. Some of them became compassionate, and some simply craved power. There is nothing magical or otherworldly about the Rats of NIMH, and that's what makes them so fascinating. When given an intellect, they just became people. This movie might actually have begun my first interest in the intellect, and the question almost every philosopher and scientist has struggled with since the dawn of time. What happened between the time beings couldn't think and the time that they could? When we started to understand things, what did we understand? What is the nature of what we understand? How do we understand it? This movie makes you think about those questions in a way I had never seen before, and to this day, it still fascinates me. The conflict Mrs. Brisby faces is excellent, and the lengths she will go to in order to save her son is just fantastic. Brisby turns out to be just as brave as her husband as she works to help the rats move her home. But it's the story of the rats themselves that captivates me most of all. There's just one little thing about all this that always seemed a bit out of place for me. Not bad, mind you, just out of place. And that's the magic stone Nicodemus gives to Brisby. In fact, Nicodemus himself seems to have a certain magic quality about him. I'm not sure what either of those things have to do with the scientific experiment that was performed on the rats. They spend so much time establishing that this all had a scientific explanation, and then they throw magic people and items into this. I don't know, that was a little weird for me. But again, not bad. Just a little strange. This movie faces personal and intellectual challenges that even some films directed solely at adults never face. It's very intense. There's a lovable crow character who was put in here to keep things from getting too intense, but it's mostly very serious. It gives you a protagonist who is an average person, which only makes her more heroic, and it addresses deep philosophical questions that will stimulate the intellect as well as the imagination. The Secret of NIMH is as good as any animated feature film ever has been, and it's one that I watch frequently to this day. The film is simply amazing.